whole reality out there that we don't have access to. And so scripture, written by pre-scientific men, is simply the manifestation of that which they could know. It's limited by what they could know. And it's their attempt to explain why we're here, what's the purpose of our being here, and so on. If we need that narrative, though, perhaps science can supply it. Perhaps science can supply the subject of that narrative. And later again, when he talks about the two main divisions of academia, the sciences and the humanities, one of the reasons he privileges humanities, and within humanities privileges poetry, is that it is the poets who will be able to offer us that sacred narrative that we desire, that we need, the subject of which will be evolutionary history, rather than the kinds of cosmological creation that we have in Scripture. Okay? And then finally, he at the last paragraph on page 7, I want to note this as well. He invokes the Icarian myth, the myth of Icarus. And as you know, Icarus was warned by his father Daedalus, who had fashioned wings made of wax, not to fly too close to the sun. And Icarus does. He flies too close to the sun. His wings melt and he plunges into the sea. And he suggests that can be read either as a cautionary tale or as an inspirational tale. If we read it as a cautionary tale, then what we're suggesting is its relation to academic, intellectual endeavor is for us not to go too far, not to push the boundaries. That's the caution. The inspirational tale is that we must, and even if we fail, it is a splendid failure. But to advance our understanding of the world and each other, we have to press. This seems in line, certainly, with Mill's call for a kind of the boldness of intellectual endeavor, that we can never shrink from the conclusions that we may be headed to. And this seems certainly in line with Wilson's view on science. Okay, so the next chapter that you read was chapter 2, The Great Branches of Learning. And what he does in this chapter is introduce us to the term consilience. He had talked about the Ionian enchantment earlier, that sense that we could find the connections, the great laws that would unify all branches of learning, our understanding of the world itself. And so what he uses is the term consilience, and as he talked about it, it was the literal jumping together. And he means it in this case, the jumping together or the unification of the academic disciplines. And this becomes a lament in some ways of the state of higher education, which he notes has grown increasingly specialized and fragmented. Very often what happens when you go to a college is you take your general education courses. Those were those courses that were meant to give you some sort of breadth of understanding. Usually you're required to take so many hours in humanities, so many hours in social sciences, so many hours in the hard sciences, and so on. And the advice oftentimes that you'll hear from people is to go ahead and take those, and there's not really any relationship between them. It's just kind of like a salad bar. You take a little of this, a little of that. But there's no coherence or connection between them. To go ahead and get those out of the way and get onto something that you really care about, your major, and then once you get into your major, you move into increasing levels of specialization. The problem with this, he sees in the real world, is that it doesn't really prepare us to deal with issues in the real world, and that it's a reflection upon our educational system or a reflection upon us rather than a reflection of reality. Reality, he would argue, is in fact connected, is in fact integrated. And what we've done is to try to categorize it and to split it and to fragment it. So what he would like, ultimately, is for higher education, for colleges and universities, to work more along this model of integration or consilience. That way, when you move to addressing real problems in the world, such as environmental problems, you realize that you can't address it simply as a biologist would address it, and you can't address it simply as a theologian or a philosopher would address it. But if you're prepared to address it from a range of perspectives, and you understand the language, and you understand how they're connected, then you're in a better position to solve it. Interestingly and incidentally, I would just note, this was in many ways the very purpose of the CTI program that you're enrolled in. I know oftentimes when first year students come, there's a certain level of grousing about the requirement to take CTI 100 responsible self, that you have to read these texts, and you say, well, why do I have to read the Bhagavad Gita? I'm a nursing major, I'm a business major, or why do I have to read Wilson or Augustine's Confessions? This is the beginning course that introduces you to the notion of interdisciplinarity, that as you're looking at text from a variety of disciplinary perspectives and that demonstrate a range of worldviews, the courses that you'll take from here on out then are all integrated, they're coherent, they're all interdisciplinary, and they stretch all the way up to the senior year. So CTI is not, which was formerly our general education program, is not simply something that you want to get out of the way and move on to, but because we're a liberal arts college, we really do believe this, that to be educated, you need to be educated liberally, which means a kind of breadth and depth of understanding of subjects and disciplines and texts that you would not encounter necessarily if you're left to your own devices or your own interests. So by the time you get to the senior year, by the time you get to your capstone course, you will be taking on real questions. You'll be dealing with real issues, but you'll be able to bring to bear upon it everything that you have learned, everything that you've learned up to this point. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter, chapter 3, which is the Enlightenment. This is the chapter in which Wilson is historicizing the development of the scientific method. And he starts with the Enlightenment because he suggests that that became really the beginning of this notion of the realization of the Ionian enchantment of Consilience, that we could begin to find those natural laws, the substrata of the reality of the material world that would help us to understand it. We'd be able to understand the connections between ways of knowing. And he uses the Marquis de Condorcet as a kind of prototypical figure of this. He was a polymath. He knew a number of subjects. He was the one who first introduced the application of mathematics to the social sciences. He ended up dying, of course, at the hands of those involved in the Reign of Terror, all within the context of the French Revolution. And the reason for that, and so the failure of the Enlightenment, he suggests, came from this kind of what he calls a kind of dark angelic flaw. And that was this, that if we do believe that all knowledge can be consolidated, that there can be a particular way in which to live, that can give rise to various kinds of tyrannies, various kinds of fascistic movements, and they can be political, they can be theological. But the moment that you believe that reality or truth can be consolidated in this way, those who disagree with you or arguments that seem to oppose that are often excluded, or people executed or outcast in various ways. And again, as we see, if you think about the relationship to Mill, one of Mill's arguments, of course, was that we needed always to be open to oppositional perspectives, that part of the tyranny of the majority was a tyranny bent upon excluding those minority or oppositional voices. And oddly, ironically enough, this could be the result of the Enlightenment as well. He introduces us to a couple other concepts here that are important. He talks about, again, he reintroduces the idea of the fear of science, and he uses the example of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. part of the fear of science